So, yesterday, Facebook reminded me of something that happened 3 years ago to the day. This day. Oh, thanks. This day of my PhD graduation. Now, you may think I'm smiling with pride there. Don't be fooled, that's relief. And the reason I was relieved was because I knew that I never wanted to write anything that long again. And I knew that I wanted out of conventional academia, and holding on to that bit of paper signified to me that I could stop following rules and do what I liked. So with that attitude, I'm surprised I'm not only standing here, but working at this institution and being allowed to talk to you unfiltered, but here we are. So on the run-up to finishing my PhD, the job market to me seemed impenetrable. Positions seemed to be suspiciously choreographed, if not lined up for candidates that departments had nurtured for years. They were reserved for outsiders that had come from big hitter institutions. To someone from the far north, from a university with a very small department, I knew my prospects were less than ideal, especially someone who did not have the financial stability to sit home and churn out publications without generating enough money to stay alive. To get anywhere, I was going to have to be a bit unusual. So somehow I managed to convince the University of Aberdeen to fund me to turn bits of my PhD thesis into an app, as opposed to a book. I used that opportunity to get out of the mainstream. I believe, and I still believe, that the future of art history will be focused on public engagement, and more specifically academic engagement via advanced technology and unique experiences. Essentially, I used the postdoc to learn and consolidate digital media skills, such as creating 3D environments and editing audio and video. Basically, I learned the skills needed to convey my research in a manner that the masses understand, and not just the elite through written academic analysis. This gamble paid off, and I managed to wheedle my way in here somehow. And since coming here, I've been on a secret mission, which I now have the security, with a permanent contract to publicly state, to change art history and perceptions of it, to amplify what I love about the subject and change what I despise about it. And predominantly, I love that art history inspires new ways of thinking. I'm from a relatively unknown place. I went to a normal school. I do not fit into the mainstream heteronormative gender binary of the world around me. For me, looking at art is a way of coming to terms with this and figuring out why the world looks the way it does explains some of these truths to me. It's being fully aware of this fact, and being aware that someone with the majority of my life experiences does not feel welcome in galleries or academic institutions that motivates me to change perceptions of art history via the Courtauld from within. Now, thankfully, the Courtauld has someone who is more in a position of power, who wants to do this too, Alex. I'm just the sidekick of the operation. So what we want to do with this conference is to demonstrate that art history is not what we've all been told it is. It's so much more. It can connect to other subjects, industries, and innovations that go beyond it, and furthermore, it has the potential to do more than we currently believe that it does. In addition, we can teach it in different ways and change notions of what conventional art historical research is and who it is for. It is this ethos that has infiltrated the Research Forum's programming of late. For example, we've set up DARG to teach ECR skills that make them able to convey their work to larger and more diverse audiences through digital means. We've established ResFest with a format to demonstrate that art history is not just for lecture theatres and academics, that the ideas and topics that art historians work on have the ability to be life-changing and perspective-changing for all. And we're embarking on ResFest National, the first one being in Belfast, one of our Courtauld Connects regions, to demonstrate that we are beyond these walls and we are an ethos, not a department that has a history ingrained into the culture of the UK, and an institution that is indebted to the hard work of many people over the years via Courtaulds Limited. The beliefs and motivations that underpin everything new that is happening at the Research Forum brings us to the second session, a debate focused on defining and defying discipline. The speakers who have been handpicked to discuss this topic have all demonstrated publicly via their research that they are defying conventional notions of art history and as a discipline. So I'm just going to introduce you all. I love how you've all come and stood here. I didn't ask them to do that, but that's kind of, that's kind of handy. Here they are. I'm going to introduce you all just in one lump now, and then you can add anything that I've missed. So first up, we're going to have Professor Antony Bale, and he's Executive Dean of the School of Arts at Birkbeck, University of London. Bale has published on medieval literature, culture, and religion. In particular, his work has explored relations between Christians and Jews in medieval England, and more recently, the culture of medieval pilgrimage. His current work focuses on travel, books, and pilgrimage between England and the Holy Land in the later Middle Ages. And next up, we have Dr. Marta Abner. She's Deputy Director of V&A Research Institute, so strong VARI representation today. And she co-leads the VARI research project Encounters on the Shop Floor, Embodiment and the Knowledge of the Maker. Before joining VARI, she was head of V&A RCA History of Design. Her curatorial experience includes directing the award-winning research project for the V&A exhibition At Home in Renaissance Italy, which is funded by the Getty Foundation and the HRC. And last up, we have one of the home squad. We have Dr. Christian Bulger, and he is our Marie Curie Research Fellow, having joined the Courtauld in October 2017 on a 2-year fellowship funded by the European Union. Christian is on leave from his regular position as a research fellow and lecturer at Johannes Gutenberg Universiteit, Mainz. His scholarly interests focus on modern and contemporary art, with specializations in conceptualism of the 60s and 70s and 19th century French art. Now that doesn't sound undisciplined, it is, and he'll explain why. So with that, I will hand over to the speakers himself, and first up we have Antony to tell you more about his research and explain why he sees himself as defying discipline.
Okay, thank you very much, Fern, and thank you, Alex, for this invitation. And I've taken Fern and Alex at their word, and I'm going to have a kind of unorthodox, undisciplined presentation for you today. I'm just going to make a few fairly discontinuous points, some prompts, some conversation points that hopefully Marta and Christian and others in the room will pick up on. And I should perhaps start off by saying that I've always been undisciplined. My first degree, my BA, was in English. My MA was in medieval studies with history of art. My PhD, I went back to English. And now my job title, Professor of Medieval Studies, is thoroughly interdisciplinary, and interdisciplinarity is at the heart of what I do. And in my current research project on books and libraries moving between England and the Holy Land in the Middle Ages, I could have taken a kind of very traditional bibliographical approach to that, but I'm trying to take a much more holistic approach to something which is, by its nature, unruly, transnational, multidisciplinary. But what I'm going to talk about today very briefly is a project I've been working on over the last 2 years with an artist. I've been working with an artist named Shai Chamayas, who unfortunately couldn't join us today, and he's a London-based digital animator. And most of his work is in commercial animation, so he does things like credits to films or adverts or title sequences. And he also does films for museums and galleries to bring to life their holdings. And we developed an artist residency at Birkbeck, and we're very fortunate to get funding from the Leverhulme Trust for this artist residency for a project on animating the page, bringing medieval manuscripts into conversation with contemporary animation. Now, this is where my PowerPoint's going to go really messy, I think. Okay. Now, this project was actually seeded in my mind about 10 or 11 years ago when I was writing a book, which I've kind of forgotten what I said in it now, but I was writing a book about violence as an intellectual method in medieval culture. And I was thinking in that book a lot about vision, the history of emotions, and about the capacity of medieval media to move their viewer, to move their user. And I've just got this image here, because I wrote some stuff in this book about hunting in margins as a kind of way of hunting for meaning in the book, but also as a way of animating the book as you read it. You follow the hunt through the margins as you make your way through the book. This is just one of many examples. You can see this kind of hunt going on. And some of these hunting scenes end up in a very violent way, with the dogs kind of jumping on the deer and ripping it to pieces, often at a pivotal point in the text. And this work I found very exciting, but I also found lots of the bibliography on these sources was very tired, and spoke about the medieval viewer and the modern viewer in a very bland, flattening, almost patronizing way, and particularly sought to elide or hide the subjectivity of the viewer now. I wanted to implicate myself in viewing a source like this, and I wanted to think about what was happening to me when I encountered some of the sources that I was offering an opinion on. Here's another nice example. So I forgot to put the manuscript shelf mark on it. This is an initial in a nice manuscript in Edinburgh, kind of speaking back at the viewer, as a kind of sheet of vellum with some glasses on it, sticking its tongue out at the viewer. So I'd become very interested in the way books were brought to life, but then I didn't really know what to do with that. And of course, one of our scholarly methods here would be just to collect more and more examples, and define our iconography and say what we're looking for. But this became a slightly kind of deadening method for me. So, with Shai, the artist, we developed the Artist Residency, and some of the questions we kind of have been asking is, can contemporary animation help us see what we may no longer see in medieval books, or that we've actually trained ourselves out of seeing in medieval books? Can we activate our emotions using digital art, using contemporary animation, in ways which are similar to how medieval people engage their emotions in their illuminated manuscripts? Can we think about the repeated viewing of something like a Book of Hours or a Psalter, with the cyclical patterns and repeated methods used in animation? And what techniques did medieval artists use to animate the mind and communicate via the eyes? So, and really this is Shai's interest, the artist, was much more in how could he use medieval media to think about the kind of digital saturation that we have today, and the way we're all surrounded by a world of instant images, and he wanted to look at how medieval media interacted with that. And what place is there, something that Fern's just mentioned, for medieval sources in the digital future and in digital art. So I'm going to talk very quickly about some of the stuff that Shai and I did. And during the residency, we met once a week, usually in a library, an archive, a gallery, including at the Courtauld and at the V&A. Really, Shai put together a set of kind of style references, as he would do for a commercial client. And these were things that were led by his curiosity and his aesthetic pleasure. So this was a very different way of thinking about research. I was kind of surrendering value to my artist, and he was picking up on things. And he fell in love with this book, The Hours of Marguerite d'Orléans. The actual thing is in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, but then there's a facsimile in London that we used. And he fell in love with the margins of this book, which have a lot of images of pilgrimage and traveling and gathering as symbols of intellectual reading. And he saw this as very much a parallel technology to animation at bringing the page to life and putting movement into the page, putting narrative into the page through certain sequences and stories. So here on the big image on the left, you've got the path running up the right-hand side of the margin, which the viewer follows, but in a contrary motion, perhaps, to how they follow the central main image and text. It's another lovely image from the same book, of people gathering letters. So the book has actually kind of come to life there. So basically, he put together his sources, but he also put together some more surprising references. We were talking about pilgrimage and people from the West traveling to the Holy Land. And Shai is Israeli, and he saw lots of continuities with early Israeli design, which was also a stimulus to going to the Holy Land in the 20th century. So he wanted to bring together some of these biblical and medieval images with more modern designs. He also, Alex, you'll be pleased to know, he fell in love with medieval monsters, but in a very discontinuous way. He wasn't looking, for the iconography of them. He was looking at what they meant to him, and thinking about how they kind of represented pain or violence or some kind of pleasure in the imagery. And they were often out of place and kind of interrupting on the page. We'd spent a lot of time looking at maps and various kind of ways of organizing space, and also thinking about calligraphy and the artists, the ink-based art that we encountered in the books. Now, so this is a kind of encapsulation of the working method we ended up doing. It was bringing together all his knowledge. So I really like the point you made about people bringing their knowledges to our museums. He brought together all his knowledge with my knowledge to produce a few short films, and I'm going to show you one in a second. And when we were talking about the lion as a symbol of Jerusalem, he immediately thought of the British Museum lions and all the stuff from the Middle East that's there. But we also thought about kind of the lion in medieval manuscripts and lion in public art in Jerusalem. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking really and show you our film now. You can follow our progress on our Instagram site, and we are curating a little exhibition which opens next week at the Peltz Gallery in Bloomsbury. I'll leave this on the table. But I want to say, really, before I show you our film, that my project with an artist has been incredibly stimulating and exciting for me. I think we often forget in our academic methods how over-specialized and arcane and difficult our routes to knowledge are. That we're used to going into the British Library or to the National Art Library or something. Most people aren't, who haven't done a PhD or a master's or something. And then how we use indexes, how we use reference books, how we use facsimiles. There's a very specialized set of knowledge to that, and opening that up to my artist was very, very exciting. But it also reminded me how its 20 years of study have given me that route. Also, through working with the artist, I rediscovered the pleasure in discovery, which I actually think I'd kind of lost in my academic method. That he brought me to new things, and he showed me new ways of understanding things, which I'd really kind of stopped doing, and rediscovered the pleasure of creating and making. He also, I think, challenged lots of my chronological and historical ways of thinking by bringing all these very generative anachronisms into the work, which is also a very medieval way of thinking. And finally, I'd say that if we use our academic knowledge to work with artists, makers, craftsmen, it's a way of adapting or resisting the impact and public engagement agenda through making something new which has a purchase on our historical materials and playing our part in the creative industries, but at the same time keeping kind of intact and extended what we actually do. So I'm going to just finish by showing you one of the films we made, I think, which is about 2 minutes long, and this is based on the stuff we did about Pilgrim's books, and yeah, I hope you like it. Thank you.
As you can see, I've been a bit too generous and liberal with my slides, so I'm going to kind of cut quite a few out and try to kind of stick to my brief. And one of the things that Fern suggested is to provide a bit of a personal journey, but also to highlight ways in which in our, if you like, everyday art historical practice, we can see emerging, surfacing interesting trends that perhaps might represent an interesting way of thinking of the way forward for the undisciplined discipline. And so that's really what I would like to devote the next few minutes to. First of all, I'm not going to go into this, but what I'm doing at the moment, as Joe referred to earlier, goes under the aegis of the Vienna Research Institute, supported by the Mellon. We run a whole host of projects. We have quite an eloquent website, and I encourage all of you to refer to that if you want to hear more. But really what I wanted to kind of highlight today is, first of all, the sense that, for me, one of the kind of crucial aspects of art history that I would like to see develop is from the singular to the ungrammatical plural, double plural. And by this I mean the sense that we're looking at something that etymologically refers to a process of moving towards something, that what ultimately the root of ars is. And yet we have a discipline that some of us might perceive occasionally as a bit static. So how to embrace a kind of more dynamic approach towards art history. At a personal level, some of this has involved trying to bring together two kind of aspects of my background that I haven't ever managed to kind of quite resolve. I'm trained as an art historian and in literary studies, but I also have a degree in Chinese studies and Mandarin. And for me, the work of the past years has been also an attempt to kind of somehow straddle, kind of draw a line between these two aspects of my background. Working at the V&A has been an invaluable environment for articulating some of these questions, particularly those that have to do with challenging hierarchies of art historical knowledge. It's a museum that many of you will know very well, and that stands out in terms of the extraordinary diversity of its collections, the multiple canons that sit under the same roof, most of the time quite peacefully, but definitely different canons we are looking at, and also the kind of very complex geopolitical histories that are materialized within those collections. And in a way, for me, the fact that a lot of the collections embody these tensions has been an opportunity for thinking quite afresh about some of the practices within the art historical discipline, which perhaps bring it closer to cultural history than to art history itself. And there, one of the opportunities for rethinking about the canon and the hierarchies has been working on the exhibition we hosted there in 2006, which was about recognizing how a large proportion of the objects we held in our collections went under the bracket, if you like, of domestic arts, and kind of sat in a rather uncomfortable position with the kind of canon of art history, even for that period, which tends to accommodate maybe a greater diversity of art historical embodiments than other periods. And so for me, it was about trying to, in a way, give voice to the extraordinary art historical agency that a lot of the objects that constituted the Renaissance interior have. And we did that through a series of installations that were about suggesting spatial relationships, suggesting the articulation of kind of social practices within the domestic interior, but they were also about bringing together, if you like, art historical research in its traditional sense, digging into documentary sources, for example, and then bring it all together into three-dimensional installations that were about trying to seamlessly integrate objects that sit in different hierarchies, in different kind of taxonomies of art historical research very often. So, if you like, the decorative arts next to the sculpture, and also the kind of, objects that fit into the European canon of arts with objects that don't, like these outstanding Islamic pots that you see on one of the shelves. And ditto with the Medici study that we extracted from its rather sad situation of being walled in our galleries, and then redisplaying it for the first time in this kind of three-dimensional environment in which we were able not only to suggest their spatial relationships, but also to try to kind of do something towards showing the extraordinary technological feat that the La Robbia labors of the month embodied. And also engage into mixed social practices and social hierarchies within the interior, with the kind of kitchen being a place where we were able to show non-elite material culture in a kind of prominent way. This was the result of an interdisciplinary collaboration, very emphatically so. And here you see some of the members of the group, which kind of brought together museum professionals, medieval archaeologists, Islamicists, historians of food and music and art and architecture to kind of work collaboratively over a certain period of time. And for me, this was really an experience of, if you like, bringing different practitioners of history together. More recently, in a way, my experience has been about zooming out a bit further in terms of stretching my, if you like, art historical kind of knowledge and kind of skill set into areas that are perhaps less comfortable than that. And some of it has to do with engaging with embodied knowledge, tacit skill, if you like, implicit knowledge, and with histories of making, rethinking about histories of labor, and if you like, the social history of art. And one of the ways in which I've begun to do this is by engaging into processes of labor through reconstruction. I did that in different ways, but recently by working very closely with an intarsia maker in Florence. I occupied a space in his workshop for a number of weeks and spent time trying to reconstruct this inlay panel that you see in situ here, by kind of carving out a kind of station, a workstation in his workshop, and trying as best as I could to kind of engage with questions of physicality and temporality of labor, in a way showing my incredible technical incompetence by painfully, day by day, adding a tiny little bit to this entire reconstruction. This has been, for me, an absolutely extraordinary opportunity to stretch, if you like, art history in its, I think, quite natural, actually, potential links towards histories of technology and science. And that has also resulted in kind of experimenting in a more kind of didactic fashion, if you like, because some of that has then fed into one of the courses that we taught to our MA students on the History of Design course, becoming a kind of little subversive cell of the Making and Knowing project that Pamela Smith is doing in Columbia, and reconstructing historical varnishes with the help of conservators or curators at the V&A and of our historical collections, and trying to kind of gain the extra skill set that reconstructive approaches to art history can bring forward. And And finally, the latest project that kind of goes under the aegis of VARI, and it's a collaboration between the Victorian Art Museum and Imperial College London, which I would like to point out put themselves in the bracket, rather interestingly, of STEM with roots. I thought that was kind of important to kind of foreground. And this project brings together different knowledge makers, with art and design historians being just one of the component of the team. And so we have, educationalists, performers, scientists, academics of different provenance, museum professionals and students working together to think about the different skills that can only emerge once we start to work collaboratively and think about cross-fertilization. An interesting example, recent example of this has been, for example, the collaboration that is emerging between a vascular surgeon, an embroiderer, and a museum professional around switching and swapping stitches. And the stitch that kind of comes from a close investigation of a historical collection has now made its way into the operating theatre. But it's not just about this kind of direction of the relationship, if you like, from kind of museum and the kind of craft knowledge into STEM. It's also about how the art historian can bring the long view, can help articulate a confidence in the value of tacit skill and knowledge. And it seems to me that in the kind of age of the sensory turn, art history, with its very strong embodiness, can certainly represent a very important approach to contribute to the process whereby we know through an embodied engagement with things, and some of that is starting to make its way into some of the educational prototypes that we started to kind of operate under VARI, and which we hope will pave the way to some of the new access that V&A East will bring forward. And kind of finally, I just wanted to kind of say that where we could do more, where there are some big challenges ahead, is also about giving more room, engaging more explicitly with so-called troubling objects, with the kind of difficult histories of our collections, and to begin to decolonize the museum. This is one of the projects that kind of, again, runs under VARI, but that can stretch well beyond, if you like, the kind of conventional periodization of colonial histories. And to conclude, I just wanted to kind of flag up something that I'm working on for my current book project, which kind of looks at finding ways to kind of connect artifacts that are very distant in place, but that might in fact have very interesting kind of technological connectivities by looking at a number of different technologies that haven't quite made it into the Renaissance canon, but I think are very important nevertheless, such as European ceramics and the way in which some of their features can only be explained through a connectivity with non-European ceramics. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm going to be fairly short, and first of all, I would like to thank Alex and Fern and the whole Research Forum team, not only for inviting me to participate in this conference, but also for having hosted me here for already 9 months now. It's been really wonderful. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to stay here for, I think, 15 months longer, and to do research on a project which is titled Worldly Matter, the Materials of Conceptual Art. And one aspect of my research, and the slide here already tells you a little bit about this, is that I'm looking at artists in the 1960s, 1970s, who have been using really unusual materials, such as, for example, here in Robert Barry's case, inert or noble gases, helium, xenon, radon, neon, and 2 others. Or in this case here of Japanese artist Hitoshi Nomura, dry ice and iodine is, I think, the pronunciation. And these artists have chosen those materials for very particular reasons, or more precisely for the particular properties of these materials. In Barry's case, it has to do with a particular faculty of inert gases that they endlessly expand, and that they don't mix with the atmosphere, so that in Robert Barry's phrasing, the inert gas series and the gases are still in the atmosphere right now, and at this very moment you're all breathing them in. So it's theoretically unlimited in terms of size and eternal. But at the same time, it's just like a moment when you open the bottle, it says, and the gas is there, and that's it. And for Nomura, it's about dry ice and iodine sublimating, which means that they go straight from a solid state to a gaseous state without passing through an intermediate liquid state. And both artists have also made very clear that it was these particular properties of the materials that they were interested in. And I mean, I didn't want to do too many slides, but Barry is talking about these incredible materials, and it's not about manipulating them, but just letting them do what they're supposed to do, which then opens up like a whole set of questions on material agency and so on. Now the question, what does this have to do with interdisciplinarity or art history undisciplined? I think I have three answers. Answer number one is really basic. I mean, when you look at these practices, it's kind of helpful to have at least like a very basic understanding of physico-chemical processes. Like what means sublimation, what does an inert gas do, under which atmospheric conditions. So I've been like Googling around a lot on these things. Maybe a little bit more profoundly, I mean, although on the one hand these are very material practices, they're at the same time very much theoretically and even philosophically informed, and so it makes sense, of course, to also look at them, or it can make sense to look at them through the framework of philosophy. So, for example, recently, last December, I co-organized a conference at my home department in Mainz with a philosopher colleague on sublimation, and we took this physico-chemical process that these artists are working with. I mean, Judy Chicago is another important example who worked with dry ice, and we took this as a basis to think about sublimation also as a philosophical and psychoanalytical concept with a lot of implications of like ennobling something from base matter to something like spirituality or intellect or concept or whatever, or also like from the body to reason and so on. That was my second answer. And the third answer, I mean, it has been argued several times, most prominently perhaps by Peter Osborne, like about the importance of these 1960s, 1970s practices for contemporary art up until today. So that maybe all contemporary art is post-conceptual. And when you look at what you could refer to as like the legacy of conceptual art or whatever, you have like research-based practices, the artist is archivist, the artist is ethnographer, and so on and so on. In other words, I mean, already here we have artworks that are kind of difficult to label. I mean, what is it? Is it sculpture, yet very ephemeral sculpture, or is it photo-based work, or is it more like about the idea and our imagination? So these were artists who very consciously defied disciplines in the sense of like medium-based art making and so on. And these more recent practices, research-based, etc., I would say do this even more. And so for the study of contemporary art, I would argue it's important to also look beyond the framework of traditional art historical methods and convictions and perhaps prejudices or whatever, and to have art history, to have an art history that's undisciplined in a good, in a positive way. And probably that's something that's also good for art history in general. So that's basically what I tried to say.
Okay, firstly, thank you all very fascinating contributions, and I'm just so happy I picked you as a team to discuss this topic, defining exactly how you all defy discipline in your own rights. Before we open it up to the audience, I'm going to kind of follow the same model that Alex has done and invite you to kind of comment on each other's papers. I think what struck me was that within your role at Vari, Marta, you play a very kind of crucial part in demonstrating why art history matters to different fields in different ways. I mean, the fact that we now know that there's stitching that you have managed to bring into the operating theatre, I mean, I find that quite fascinating and quite exciting, and one of the sort of reasons why we're doing this conference is to work out exactly the impact that we can have and consolidate that and think upon it for the future. I'm wondering what you two boys, Antony and Christian, thought when you heard that. Did you start to think of ways that your research can connect in new ways and the impact that it can have? And Antony, maybe you could speak a little bit about the kind of reach you've had by presenting your research in this way, for example.
I've got lots to say about all of that. I suppose one of the things, it's a slightly indirect answer, but one of the things that that it took me a long time to feel confident about working with the animator, with the artist, is that it wasn't going to result in a scholarly publication. Mm-hmm. It was never going to go there. This is the most scholarly audience I've brought this work into. But it was going to do stuff, we've had the online film, and I don't know how many hits it's had, and we've had the Instagram account, we've got our exhibition starting next week. So it's got this kind of other research practice going on as an open-ended process. And that's very liberating, actually, when you're used to trammeling things into a publication shape. And obviously this work is touching scholarly communities and non-scholarly communities a long way outside where I would normally be orientated in, late medieval academic journals. So that's really, at the same time, I think there's some limits to that, and Marta kind of touched on them, about losing control of your expertise, which can be quite disorientating and frightening, that you're used to being able to produce knowledge in the shape that you are used to, and then when you're kind of ceding it to someone else, it's exciting and exhilarating, but also feels full of risk. That's not a very clear answer to your question.
No, I think it is in a way. And can you just maybe explain what sort of feedback you've had from colleagues about this project? Have they thought, what have they kind of said? Have they been like, oh, this is great, this is fascinating? Have they added anything beyond that?
Okay,
or
that actually really,
have you had some criticism?
No, not at all. That picks up on two important points I forgot to make in my presentation. One is that the Leverhulme Trust has discontinued the Artist in Residence scheme, which is a great loss, I think, to university settings, because it was one of the ways that someone like me with an academic job could be involved in art and making art and artists, which had some scholarly value, i.e. the money flows through the university, I'm bringing something to the department, the artist was a resource for my colleagues. And if any of you understand why Leverhulme stopped this scheme, I'd be really interested to know. But the other thing is that from my position now as Dean of the School of Arts at Birkbeck, this little project actually fits into a much bigger shape of things, which both Marta and Christian have touched on, about thinking and making, or thinking and doing, as being really parallel academic practices. And we're seeing this at Birkbeck in things like museum curating, filmmaking, digital art, critical animation studies, creative writing, theatre producing, performance studies, where people are academics, but they're also doing stuff. And that traditional divide between theory and practice, I think, is dying, which is a good thing, I think. Sorry.
I find this super interesting because actually when I listened to both of, I don't know whether this micro really works, but when I listened to both of your presentations, I mean, that was what I most thought about, that maybe this move out of the comfort zone had a lot to do in both cases with going from thinking, studying, to making in different senses. And I found this very interesting for several reasons. One being that I'm also very interested in this moment when like art history and conservation studies and actual art practice come together. For example, here at the Courtauld in the sculptural processes study group that I'm glad to be in, but also because from my own field of research, it's a bit paradoxical because I mean, of course, you could look at like the stylistic or technical specifics of the photographs, how Robert Barry does them, and so on. And it's interesting to a certain degree. But on the other hand, of course, it's a type of art where all these questions, where the artists also up to a certain point try to subvert these notions of making and carefully crafting something, and so on. So I found it, and then I also found it interesting because I mean, also what we're doing is also the type of practice, of course, and I often found it most interesting when you talk with academics in a more informal setting, for example, to talk about the practice of writing and how like strategies and also limits and challenges and so on. So I think thinking and making is an interesting angle at art history Undisciplined in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that I mean, it's certainly a kind of practice that in certain disciplinary areas maybe not as represented, you know, today here, but you know, archaeologists have long kind of brought together these, and you know, it's also the kind of practice that, for example, is absolutely right at the heart of conservation practice in museums, in which you know a lot of this kind of learning through doing and kind of through you know very embodied experimentation is absolutely at the heart of kind of conservation practice. But you know, I wonder whether in a way, you know, one of the kind of questions we are kind of addressing today is, on the one hand, the question of translation, you know, because it seems to me that some of the kind of things that were hinted at also the kind of in the introduction today are to do with the fact that in a way some of the building blocks towards creating homogeneous knowledge, whatever that means, have been taken out for very complex reasons. Some are to do with national education systems, some have to do with processes of entirely geopolitical, of kind of migration, of kind of, you know, societies diversifying enormously, and this means that in a way, you know, some of the expectations about kind of being able to go from A to B through a certain kind of predicted, you know, itinerary have kind of, you know, have become obsolete, and this kind of makes a kind of, you know, brings forward a kind of strong imperative for all of us and all our institutions to kind of think about ways in which some kind of new effective form of communication can be invented. And you know, it seems to me that the kind of film that you showed, it kind of does that very, very brilliantly. I mean, you can imagine that maybe some of this is also about perhaps intergenerational knowledge. You know, I wonder, but I thought as I was watching, I was thinking, we certainly can appeal to a non-specialist, but you can also appeal to a child or a kind of somebody, you know, young who doesn't have maybe the kind of literary tools to approach a kind of source of that complexity. So you know, perhaps this might be one of the things that as a discipline, art history kind of you know, needs to kind of come to terms with, which are the kind of processes of translation.
Sure. I think because we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to open it up to the audience right now and see if anyone does have a question. Oh, straight in there. Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to touch more on what Marta touched upon, questioning more about decolonization in history of art, in terms of bringing cultural diversity into it. Maybe I can talk to you later, Marta. I'm writing the Thames and Hudson World of Art series book on Sikh art and architecture, and for that, to give value for Sikh painting, which hasn't been defined in the history of Indian painting, because it follows the Eurocentric principles of adding value to history of art, stylistic ones. I'm bringing in an interdisciplinary approach into it from material culture, anthropology of art, to add value to sick painting so that it can be recognised as a canon. And this comes into cultural diversity and what's now called decolonization in academia. So I don't know what your panelists have ever thought about this, and you obviously haven't in your work.
I mean, it seems to me that, you know, certainly one of the ways in which the urgency to be able to communicate with wider and wider audiences, and, you know, I mean, institutions like the V&A obviously now have to think about their physical footprint, but, you know, their digital footprint is you know, at least as important in terms of the kind of channels of communication and exchange. And, you know, there I think one of the questions is, you know, can this process kind of lead us to kind of complexify, to complicate some of the kind of histories of art that we have perhaps taken for granted from a kind of very European perspective?
I mean, I could answer by saying that it's no coincidence that my two examples came from two different geographical contexts, and that, I mean, personally speaking, I started as someone specializing in North American and Western European art after 1945, and that I, in the process of working on my project, thought of ways, and I'm still thinking of ways of opening it up more and more for several reasons. One also being that these practices already at the time were incredibly connected, but also in order to look out maybe a little bit more beyond a limited framework. So yeah.
And I just answer very briefly to say that these questions have animated lots of my work in the past about thinking about how Christian Middle Ages thought about Jews and other non-Christians. And in this particular project, you had me and Shai, two Jewish guys, playing around with these Christian Bibles and books of hours and thinking about, you know, the representation of Jerusalem in a really, you know, an esteemed book or some kind of famous artwork, where Shai would say, well, they got that wrong, that's all, you know, and that kind of totally undermined the culture of value that you might have around a particular artwork, or looked at it from a totally different perspective.
Thank you for your question. Does anyone else have one? Yes, Caroline.
Yeah, my question is for Christian, because you ended up by saying, well, it would be a good thing for art history perhaps to break some of the boundaries, time, space, research, boundaries that these 60s artists were doing. And obviously, in terms of finding, producing an account of the 60s, post-60s practice, art history has to. And I wonder if you could say something about why it's a good thing for art history as it tends to work before the 60s.
I mean, one way to answer it would be that I believe the field of art history, as I see today, has already done this. I mean, started to do this in any case, but also done it, and that, I mean, it could be interesting to think about whether there are some correlations between, like, changes in the field of art and changes in the field of scholarship, even if it's not just on that field of art. I mean, mainly I would say that art history is in the process of opening up already in geographical, political, and many ways. And I think it's also, and I think that this is important, and I think it's also important. I mean, of course, there are always like fashions of how you do art history now, and oh, this is so 1990s and so on. But I also hope that art history manages to be heterogeneous and allow different ways. And I mean, one thing I always find interesting is like also look at when you look at conceptualism, how critical these artists were and are maybe towards visuality and in the image, and then this question of art history is turned to visual studies or Bildwissenschaft in German, where Thomas Crow has written an interesting article where he criticizes this very strongly, and he says that these artists in a way are way smarter than the art historians, because they thought a lot of ways of criticizing and like retinal-based, image-based culture.
Do you have anything to add, or
Pardon?
You two got anything to add there? Or no?
No, I just think that artists are maybe smarter than art historians is a...
It's a very good line to it.
It's a good line.
That'll be one of the pop quotes from the conference. And then I think we've got time for one more before well-earned tea break. Can I see a hand? Eddie.
Thank you for your papers. How do you think art history will change in the coming years?
Ooh, in terms of research or teaching?
Your own practice.
Our own practices. Oh, goodness me. We're going to pack that into a minute. Should we have like kind of quick answers on this, quick fire? Shall I go first and give you some time to ponder? I think the way we currently teach art history and prepare people for a career in art history does not serve the purpose anymore, in my opinion, feel free to disagree, of what people expect. So to me, thinking about who it is that an art historian is meant to be communicating with in 2018, it's people who are attached to these for 50% of the day. And we are taught to churn out publications to get jobs, to make ourselves more secure. That kind of puts us in that direction when the content that people want to read about what we do and learn about what gets us up in the morning doesn't fit into this, usually. And I think in the future I would like to see other institutions teach art history in a more kind of collaborative way that was first inspired here by the Medal and MA, and bring in initiatives like we have set up here, like DART, for example, and that becomes more of a staple thing. It says you do not have to be a coder, but you need to know coding exists, and you need to know how what it is that you do can be turned into code that someone's going to find attractive. So I would hope that we encourage people to see their place more when we teach them. I hope that's an answer. Thank you. Christian.
I mean, I'm partly repeating myself by saying that I'm hoping that art history will become and stay as open as possible and allow for as many different approaches as possible, and also that in a university setting that such openness is possible in a context that is so much like, can you say, economicized, so it's about training and skills and so on, and about money also, and I hope that this won't like kind of limit this freedom too much. Maybe that's...
Thank you. Marta?
I mean, I would say that, I mean, for me, one of the kind of huge areas of potential for art history is to really harvest the fact that it's a discipline that at its heart has an ability to think very much in a kind of multisensorial way. And I kind of think that as we are all inhabiting and will more and more inhabit a world in which digital and physical will kind of sit in closer and closer relationship with each other, having a kind of environment that can be emphatically embodied, can think about the benefit that comes from embodied learning, that kind of can think about what it means to kind of use our multisensorial perception and cognitive ability as humans, I think has a lot to offer.
Brilliant, thank you. And Antony?
As well as what's been said, so adding to what's already been said, which I very much agree with, I think there's still a lot of work to be done on defining and redefining how interdisciplinarity actually works in an academic setting. And when can you call yourself an art historian and still be interdisciplinary and vice versa? I think that still is a kind of unanswered question. And I think my reflex answer to Edwin's question, the thing about that I'd like to see changing, or I think will change, is particularly at my end of the field in the Middle Ages, is a loosening of one kind of economic value, which is through the art market, collecting, and very wealthy private collections of kind of manuscripts and medieval artworks, into a different kind of economic thing which we don't yet know, which is on the smartphone or in digital collections, which I think is going to be, which is a really interesting but very early stage at the moment.
Brilliant. And with that, you'll be relieved to know it's tea break time, and that's going to be served down in the student cafe, so you're going to go all the way down to the basement. If you don't know where that is, follow someone who looks confident. Thank you.